The transport shuttle descended through Varley Prime's atmospheric veil, like a drunk moth navigating a chandelier, zigzagging through layers of pearlescent mist that shimmered with ionized gases. Private Eli Vance, strapped into a seat with more buckles than he thought strictly necessary, stared out the window. With the distant curiosity of someone watching their fate unfold in another man's body. Vari Prime, first contact zone. Diplomatic pearl jewel of the Anil Empire, also the place where allegedly a guy could accidentally get married to an alien princess. By yanking on an antique sword, allegedly, the palace appeared through the haze like it had been grown, rather than built, all honeycomb spirals and mineral arches that caught the sun and sang it back in color. Humming tendrils of light ran through its crystalline walls, carrying both power and apparently gossip. The whole structure perched high above a geothermal ravine, held up by a foundation of magnetogravity fields and extremely confident architects. The shuttle landed with a hiss. Diplomatic personnel dressed in various layers of overcompensation began filing out with the self-importance of people who got paid to speak in measured tones. Eli, still days from the landing and possibly the fermented snack he'd mistaken for a mint on the trip, followed them. He hadn't even meant to come here. He was supposed to be doing hull diagnostics on a freighter parked in low orbit, but there had been a clerical error, a name mix-up, and a malfunctioning printer that replaced his reassignment order with an invitation to the ritual of selection. Just follow the signs, the shuttle pilot had said, tossing him a formal robe and a pamphlet. Try not to make eye contact with anything that glows. The Hall of Ascension smelled faintly of ozone and ceremonial incense, the latter of which may have been a highly intelligent fungus currently in its contemplative phase. Dozens of species stood in quiet awe before a massive slab of gleaming crystal. Embedded in its heart was a sword, not just any sword of course, but the sword, the blade of Althurin, forged from myth memory and a highly conductive mineral found only in the collapsed remnants of star-forming nebula. Its hilt was wrapped in a braided alloy that shimmered like starlight on black water. No one had pulled it free in 700 years, not that it stopped people from trying. In fact, the line to touch the sword snaked halfway across the hall, filled with nobles, warriors, and one guy in power armor who looked like he could bench press a rhino. Eli stood near the back, yawning behind a sleeve and wondering if anyone would notice if he slipped out early. That thought was immediately dashed when a court functionary with facial tattoos that moved when he blinked shoved a ceremonial chalice into Eli's hands and hissed, "You're up next, try not to bleed on the floor." What followed was a blur of being ushered, announced, and awkwardly illuminated by floating lights that seemed aggressively enthusiastic. Eli stepped onto the day's robes, slightly askew, chalice forgotten, and stared at the crystal. The sword pulsed softly. Everyone fell silent. He reached out, not with intention, not with destiny, but with the sort of detached reflex you use when checking if something is hot. His hand closed around the hilt, and he felt something, not lightning, not divine power, more like recognition, like the sword had been waiting for him and was slightly relieved he'd finally shown up. With a gentle shirk, the blade slid free. There was silence, then pandemonium. Priest fainted. A sentient cloud gasped in 8 frequencies. The power-armored guy screamed, "Are you kidding me?" and stormed off, his shoulder jets misfiring. The palace AI began stammering in 7 languages. Eli blinked, holding the sword like it was a particularly confusing remote control. "I think I broke it," he said. "No," came a voice, smooth and cool, with a lilt that made the air feel self-conscious. "You've just broken centuries of tedium." He turned. Princess Lysarai stood at the edge of the dais, her posture regal, her expression unreadable, and her ears long, graceful. Feather-edged twitched ever so slightly. She regarded him with the kind of clinical curiosity normally reserved for newly discovered fungi or interstellar tax loopholes. "Private Eli Vance," she said, enunciating every syllable like it might escape by the rites of ascension, "and the CEX of binding you are now entitled to petition for my hand in union." Eli stared. "Wait, what now?" "It's a very old law," she added, largely ceremonial and frankly ridiculous, but unfortunately binding. "Can I petition instead for, say, a sandwich?" The princess blinked once, then smiled, just a flicker at the corners of her mouth, but it cracked the icy mask. "You amuse me, blade bearer." "Oh great, that's what I'm being Called now, isn't it, as chaos unfolded, elders squabbling, diplomats scrambling. Someone's cloak catching fire from a rogue light drone. Eli was pulled aside and briefed by a floating orb named Peak, who identified as both historian and wedding planner. Apparently, his accidental act had reawakened a dormant political accord, realigned several cosmic ley lines, and upset at least 3 interstellar betting pools. He was to remain at the palace under observation, guarded, studied, and most daunting of all, expected to complete the trials of accord before the betrothal could be formalized. No one expected him to succeed. In fact, several royal advisors were already preparing polite exit strategies involving diplomatic immunity and poorly translated poetry. Eli sat on the edge of a guest bed later that night, looking out at the glowing veins of the palace winding through the night like dreaming circuitry, the sword now hovering beside him because apparently it could do that, buzzed faintly whenever he reached for a snack. So he said to no one in particular, "I pulled a myth out of a rock, upset the galaxy, and got engaged to a woman with very judgmental ears." The sword buzzed again, possibly in agreement. "Yes," Eli muttered, "I'm going to need a bigger robe." Eli woke to the feeling of something humming against his forehead. It was the sword again, hovering, watching, possibly judging. He groaned and rolled to the side, only to fall off the bed and land with a dignified thud on the floor of his guest chamber. The floor glowed gently where his face had made contact. The palace, it seemed, had a sense of humor, or a vendetta. The guest wing had been prepared for a worthy aspirant, which apparently translated to slightly terrifying luxury, with furniture that can talk. His dressing mirror offered advice on posture and diplomacy. Every time he passed it, the towels in the refresher unit fluffed themselves in anticipation of use. The sink, when asked for water, politely inquired whether he preferred it vaporized, liquid, or sonically resonant. After the 3rd try, Eli just dunked his head in and hoped no one was watching. Breakfast was an event, not a meal. An event. He was led by a hovering usher drone named Renth, who introduced every door they passed as if it were a visiting dignitary. The dining chamber, cavernous and vaguely shell-shaped, featured a table that shimmered with holographic menus and seating cushions that adjusted their density based on political rank and hip discomfort. Lizer was already seated, nibbling at a curl of something iridescent and slightly translucent. "Good morning, blade bearer," she said, her tone both formal and wickedly amused. He sat, or at least attempted to. The cushion interpreted his motion as a dance move and rotated him slightly before settling. "Morning, princess. You know, I think your furniture is trying to train me. It's a fair exchange. You've disrupted centuries of tradition. They just want to return the favor." Servants brought a selection of dishes that looked like they belonged more in a museum than on a plate. One was pulsing gently, another had tiny reflective flakes that whispered compliments when chewed. Eli cautiously poked at something shaped like a dodecahedron. "So," he said through a bite that tasted like nostalgia and faint regret, "what exactly are these trials of accord? Do I have to fight a beast, tame a solar flare, recite poetry while balancing on a lava eel?" Lycerai raised an eyebrow. "Tempting, but no, the trials are not tests of strength. They measure compatibility, diplomacy, intent, symbolic rituals, mostly harmless, unless you're terribly dull." "Ah," he said. "So I'm doomed?" "Not necessarily. The first trial is later today, the chamber of reflection. That sounds peaceful. It isn't. After breakfast, in a brief detour in which Eli was nearly kidnapped by a misdirected teleport pad that mistook him for a singing ambassador from DLC 4. He was escorted to the trial chamber. It was carved directly into the core of the palace's crystalline matrix. The walls hummed with ancient song lines, and the floor shimmered with stored memory. A tribunal of robed figures, all with long ears and longer frowns, stood at a raised dais. The trial of reflection begins in tone from the central judge, a woman with eyes like obsidian and the haircut of someone who had never once laughed. Step forward, bearer of the blade. Eli did so with all the grace of someone walking into their own performance review. While wearing the wrong shoes, he was placed in the center of the chamber. The sword floated beside him, silent and glowing faintly. The crystal beneath his feet lit up, and then the air shimmered. Images sprang forth, memories, projections, bits of his past caught and replayed with merciless clarity. There was Eli, age 9, trying to teach his pet drone to fetch and accidentally launching it through a neighbor's greenhouse. There he was at 16. Covered in engine grease, telling a girl he liked her by building her a singing toaster. It had caught fire at 21, trying to enlist in the colonial fleet and stammering through the medical exam because the diagnostic AI had a soothing voice and no sense of boundaries. The judges watched unmoved. Lycra standing at the periphery bit her lip, then the images shifted, moments darker, watching his older brother leave on a mission he wouldn't return from, the long lonely months stationed on a mining rig during the silent border years, nights spent talking to malfunctioning food dispensers because they were the only things that didn't expect anything from him. But even these moments had their odd stubborn humor, a tiny spark of resilience. Eli ducked, tapping his boots because requisitions were slowly carving rude words into frost-covered bulkheads with a heated spoon. Eli laughing at nothing because it was either that or scream. The projection ended. The judges conferred in whispers. Eli stood in silence, uncertain if he was about to be exiled or Ned the Sword nudged his elbow as if to say, that went better than expected. The lead judge turned. You have passed. You revealed truth without flinching, humor even in pain. Balance. The first accord is accepted. He blinked. Oh great, should I curtsy or something? No, the judge said flatly, just leave back in the corridor. Lycra fell into step beside him, impressive. Most aspirants saw uncontrollably or attempt to re-edit their memories on the spot. Well, I'd cry too, but my dignity union went on strike years ago. She laughed, not a full one, but a sharp exhale that almost counted. They walked in companionable silence, their footsteps echoing softly through the palace. Lights shifted above them, casting violet and amber shadows that flickered like candle flames. So Eli said eventually, how many trials are there? 3. Let me guess, the next one involves jumping into a pool of sentient jelly and singing your deepest secrets in interpretive dance. Lycra tilted her head. No, but now I wish it did. They reached a garden carved into the side of the palace, floating orchids and gravitatifying vines winding around columns of light. It was peaceful in a way only ancient things can be, and the sword for once remained still. Eli sat on a bench that politely adjusted itself to his posture. Lycra remained standing, watching a butterfly-like creature flicker between dimensions. Why me? He asked quietly. Why the sword, the prophecy, any of it? I'm not a hero. I fix conduits and argue with vending machines. The sword doesn't choose heroes, she replied. It chooses bridges. Eli looked at her, at the calm power in her bearing, the way her ears twitched slightly when she was lost in thought. Well, he said, it could have at least picked a bridge that knows what it's doing. Perhaps, she said, smiling at last. But where's the fun in that? The next morning began with a trumpet, not metaphorically, an actual trumpet or something trumpet adjacent, honking through the air like a goose. With performance anxiety, Eli sat bolt upright in bed, hair askew, clutching the hovering sword like a teddy bear with delusions of grandeur. A floating scribe materialized at the foot of his bed, glowing faintly and carrying a scroll that unrolled itself midair, announcing the second trial, as per Clause 17 of the Accord Codex. Subheading 3. Convergence of perspectives. Attire is diplomatic. Mood is preferably sober. Eli squinted. Can I have that in a language that's had coffee? The scroll snapped shut with wounded dignity and vanished in a poof of citrus-scented light. The sword bobbed beside him, pulsing faintly, as if trying to stifle laughter. By the time he made it to the preparation hall, Eli had endured 2 wardrobe drones, arguing over whether his shoulders were authoritative or tragically unbalanced, a near ambush by a robotic hairstylist, and a breakfast roll that may have tried to bite back. He arrived dressed in a robe that shimmered with diplomatic intent and possibly holographic peacocks. The chamber of convergence looked like someone had thrown a conference room in a dream into a centrifuge. Transparent walls pulsed with faint constellations, and the floor was composed of hexagonal panels that shifted subtly beneath the feet, realigning to mirror emotional tone. Eli discovered this when he muttered something sarcastic, and the panel under him turned a skeptical chartreuse. He was not alone. Across the chamber stood Princess Lycra, calm and composed, flanked by a delegation of alien dignitaries from half a dozen systems. To his left, standing awkwardly near a sculpture that might have been sentient, was a human envoy named Petra Klein wearing the expression of someone. Moments away from resigning via interpretive explosion, Eli Vance, she whispered urgently when he approached, "Please don't touch anything, activate anything, or speak to anything with more than two syllables in its name. That's a lot of pressure," he replied. "What about chairs? No guarantees." A bell chimed, possibly a sentient bell. It gave him a wink, and the trial commenced. The second trial, Lysarai had explained earlier in passing, was designed to test one's ability to mediate across cultural boundaries, to unify conflicting viewpoints, and to avoid saying anything that could start a diplomatic skirmish. It was in short a group project. Each participant was given a scenario involving a trade dispute between the floating archipelago of Null and the subterranean bioluminescent settlements of Krith. The details were to Elise. Horror elaborately simulated in real-time holograms flickered to life, complete with miniature terrain bickering avatars, and one surprisingly accurate model of a space goat. The Cry delegation insisted on nocturnal trade cycles, citing sunlight aggression syndrome. The Null representatives refused to descend below cloud level without proper musical assurance. Both sides had already launched symbolic fruit at each other's embassies. Someone had weaponized a dessert. The situation, as the simulation helpfully stated, was ripe for misunderstanding. Eli Lund, squinting at the trade maps. "Okay, so if we synchronize their schedules with a mid-cycle twilight window and use ambient drone music to ease the Null into descent, the Null only respond to wind chimes tuned to the seventh harmonic of grief," Petra muttered, "and Cry emissaries will short out if exposed to high-frequency vibrations." "Right," Eli said. "So we fake a thunderstorm, meet in an acoustic neutral zone, and bring muffins." One of the judges raised an eyebrow. He cleared his throat. "Culturally sensitive muffins." The negotiation simulation evolved into chaos. Petra tried diplomacy. Eli tried distraction. At one point he offered a Null representative a holographic yo-yo as a token of interstellar humility. The yo-yo caught fire. The Cry avatar mistook this for a mating ritual and responded with a bioluminescent light show that shorted out part of the chamber. The sword, hovering at a safe distance, vibrated in what Eli was starting to recognize as laughter. Eventually, they reached something approximating harmony. The simulation pulsed, dimmed, and concluded with a vaguely congratulatory chime. The floor panels turned a hesitant lavender. The judges conferred, then nodded. Trial passed. One announced resolution achieved through adaptive improvisation and accidental charm. Eli blinked. "Wait, that worked. It's the Cry standard for negotiation," Lysarai explained, as she approached confusion, spectacle, and baked goods. "You inadvertently followed protocol." "Well, I always say diplomacy is mostly snacks and panic." Smiling, Petra groaned. "You've doomed us all." After the trial, the palace corridors bustled with a new kind of energy. Curators exchanged urgent whispers. News of Eli's second success spread through the crystal matrix like gossip through a fiber optic high school. Some were intrigued, others were outraged. A few placed fresh bets, and one particular faction, draped in robes darker than the vacuum between stars, watched from the shadows with quiet malice. Eli, oblivious to the rising tension, wandered into the palace observatory, followed by a snack drone offering celebratory pastries. The ceiling dissolved into transparent openness, revealing a sky ablaze with moon's rings and drifting light barges that moved like whales through water. Lysai joined him after a moment, hands folded behind her back. "You continued to surprise," she said. "I continued to wing it," he replied. "There's a difference." They stood in silence for a while. The stars spun slowly above them. The sword floated quietly beside them, no longer pulsing with urgency, merely present. "I didn't ask for any of this," Eli said finally. "I was supposed to repair a coolant regulator today instead. I'm apparently intergalactic fiancé material. It wasn't the sword's strength that responded to you," she said. "It was its loneliness." He looked at her. Her long ears twitched, subtly betraying something fragile beneath the ceremonial calm. "You're not just part of this prophecy, Eli, you might be the end of it." He blinked. "That sounds incredibly important and extremely above my pay grade." "Good," she said. "Then maybe you'll treat it with less fear than those who think they deserve it." He smiled, rueful. "Well, so far I've offended a hologram negotiated peace with pastry, and almost got eaten by a towel, so I'd say I'm doing great. Lisserai tilted her head, studying him. I think you might be exactly what this place needs: clumsy optimism, unexpected honesty. He turned back to the star's arms. Folded voice quiet, so one trial left. She nodded. The last one is not public, it's personal. Is it the kind where I find myself because I've checked all the drawers, and I think I left myself back on deck 9? She didn't answer, but her smile stayed faint but real. The stars blinked on above them, and somewhere in the palace below, the sword began to hum a tune no one had heard in centuries. The silence in the chamber was the kind that usually preceded either deep revelation or spectacular embarrassment. Eli was betting on the second. He stood in a small circular room where the walls were made of something like polished obsidian, except they pulsed faintly with internal light like the nervous system of a sleeping dragon. There was no one else inside, not even Lisserai, not even the sword, which had been politely but firmly escorted away by a robed attendant who'd called it a disruptive artifact with delusions of poetic timing. The third trial, as explained via dream injection, an unsettling method of instruction involving whispers and the taste of metal on the tongue, was a trial of intention. It did not test skill, knowledge, or social grace. It tested only why he pulled the sword, why he stayed, why he was willing to face the possibility of bonding with a woman who, while beautiful, had ears that could likely pick up satellite signals. The trial began when the room vanished. It didn't explode or fade, it just wasn't there anymore. One moment he was standing on the smooth, dark floor, and the next he was falling, except not really. There was no wind, no rush, just the sensation of descending through something thick and slow like honey or bureaucracy. He landed softly on a platform that appeared beneath him just in time. A vast sky stretched overhead, stitched with unfamiliar star structures, floated lazily in the air. Towers, fragments of ancient cities, suspended like memories too stubborn to disappear. Voices murmured in the distance, none loud enough to catch all, familiar enough to feel like people you once knew. Welcome to your center, said a voice, and Eli spun around to find a version of himself standing there, except this Eli was cleaner, sharper jawed, wearing a colonial fleet uniform that had never known a wrinkle or a coffee stain. He looked like someone who read manuals for fun and always remembered to return borrowed tools. You're me, Eli said obviously, but I'm the version of you that never stopped trying to be perfect. That must be exhausting. It is. And you gave up. I recalibrated. They walked side by side, each step creating a soft ripple beneath their feet. The platform extended as they moved, building itself from pale light. So what's this about? Eli asked. You going to tell me I'm unworthy? Number, I'm going to ask you why you're here. Really? Eli rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, at first it was curiosity, then it was stubbornness, then Lisserai the perfect. Eli tilted his head. You think this is about romance? I think this is about something I haven't fully understood yet, and every time I try, someone gives me a pastry, and a vague warning. A door appeared up ahead. Through it came another figure, his brother Aaron, as he remembered him before the last mission, laughing, tall, always wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big, like he was hiding secrets or snacks. You wanted to be like him, said perfect Eli. Yeah, you wanted to save things, people, stories. Eli nodded. Still do. Another platform extended. This one brought up images. Moments in time he thought he'd forgotten, helping a kid on a refugee transport fix her toy drone, staying up all night in the mines to keep the heating units from failing, talking an angry maintenance bot out of self-destruction using only a harmonica, and a truly bad poem you've always found the seams, said Aaron. Between people, between problems, I don't know what that makes me. A bridge, they said together. The sword appeared again, not floating, not glowing, just resting on the light. Eli stepped toward it, but before he could touch it, the voice of Lisserai echoed through the air. Though she was nowhere to be seen, the sword responds not to power but to potential. It binds to those who change rather than conquer. He looked at the blade. It looked normal, sharp. Unimpressed. I didn't come here to marry a princess, he said aloud. I came because I couldn't stand the idea that no one else could pull it free, that a story that old was just waiting for someone to stop treating it like myth and start treating it like a question. The sword vanished again. The sky cracked. A rumble passed through the platform like the universe had just cleared its throat. Then the platform collapsed and Eli found himself standing in the chamber again. The walls pulsed once, then receded, and a door slid open. Laser, I stood there. Alone. You took longer than most, she said. I got lost arguing with myself. She smiled, stepping aside to let him pass. The trial is complete. The judges agree you are compatible in intention. Do they know I once broke an entire water filtration system trying to fix a coffee dispenser? They do now. They walked in silence for a while through a hall that shimmered with reflected memory portraits formed in the walls as they passed previous Blade Bearers champions, aspirants who'd failed with grace and those who hadn't. One of them looked suspiciously like it was flipping off the viewer. Lisa stopped before a window overlooking the inner sanctum. Below, citizens were gathered in glowing tiers, murmuring with energy. The ceremony of official recognition was near. I still don't feel like a chosen one, Eli admitted. Good, she said. Those who do rarely are. He looked at her, not just at the curve of her expression or the glitter in her violet eyes, but at the fatigue she carried like a crown. She'd grown up in prophecy's shadow, in tradition's labyrinth. Her calm wasn't detachment, it was armor. I don't know how this end, he said. Neither do I, she answered, but maybe that's the point. He reached for her hand. She led him. Somewhere beneath them, the sword pulsed once faint, approving. The doors to the sanctum opened with a sound like falling stars, and the final part of the story began. The doors closed behind him with a ceremonious hum, sealing Eli into the sanctum with all the reverence of a 1,000-year-old tradition, and the faint whoosh of pressurized air. Being very serious about its responsibilities, the chamber stretched wide and circular. A vast dome of crystalline architecture threaded with threads of gold light that pulsed faintly like the heartbeat of something ancient and technologically smug. At the center, upon a raised platform shaped like an unfurling star, floated the sword. It wasn't alone this time. Figures stood in a circle around it. Elders, sages, and advisors from various allied systems, their bodies projecting both authority and questionable fashion choices. Some shimmered like holograms, piped in from other quadrants. One wore a collar so wide it might have been trying to intercept signals from deep space. Eli paused a good distance from the platform. Resisting the urge to wave awkwardly, he settled for a respectful nod that could also be mistaken for a stretch if things went poorly. One of the elders, a tall bioluminescent being whose limbs bent non-Euclidician ways, gestured. Eli Vance, you are summoned to affirm your intent and accept the role of a chord. Another, this one shaped entirely of floating geometric prisms, chimed in with a voice like wind over a bottle. Also, the muffins you requested are not compatible with our ceremonial expectations. Eli sighed. I said they were a metaphor. Metaphors require prior approval, muttered a small, cranky being whose only visible feature was a single blinking eye and what appeared to be a withering disdain for organic life. Eli walked forward slowly, the floor responding to each step with a pulse of recognition. Somewhere behind the platform, he noticed Lysarai watching him, not from the high royal seat, but from just beyond the circle of advisors. She gave him a nod. Small and almost imperceptible, but it steadied him. He reached the platform. The sword rotated in the air, not spinning, just pivoting slightly, as if sizing him up again. Eli cleared his throat. Right so. I know we've been through a lot together, me pulling you out of the space rock, you hovering ominously, that brief incident where you tried to slice my pants during a wardrobe fitting. Still not cool, by the way, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The sword did not react, though he was sure it pulsed, in what might have been smug agreement. I don't know if I'm the right one, Eli continued louder now, but I know this place doesn't need someone perfect. It needs someone who will ask questions, who doesn't treat prophecy like a grocery list. There was a pause. One of the sages leaned to another and whispered, what's a grocery? I accept the role, Eli said simply, not because I want the title or the ceremony or the incredibly impractical robes, but because this alliance, this bond is real. It's built on more than politics and myth. It's built on choice. Mine hair and ours. The sword flared, bright light cascading across the chamber in a wave that momentarily turned everything into glass and starlight. It shot forward straight at Eli. He flinched, then realizing it wasn't attacking, held out his hand. The blade landed there, light as breath, heavy as purpose. The chamber echoed with soft Approval somewhere in the walls, a chime rang 3 times. He has accepted, said. The prism being confirmed, said the bending light elder, the bond is sealed. Do we still have time for snacks? Muttered the eye creature. The ceremony concluded with a series of traditional phrases Eli only half understood, but he repeated them anyway with enough conviction to seem wise, or maybe just convincingly confused. The sages began to vanish, fading from the room one by one, until only Lysrai remained. They stood alone for a moment. The sword had gone quiet again, resting against his back in its magnetic sheath. Well, she said, you didn't set anything on fire or insult a nobles. That's above average. I'm evolving slowly. They walked out of the sanctum together, back into the winding halls of the palace. The sword glowed faintly with each step, its light casting long reflections in the crystalline walls. I was half expecting someone to challenge me mid-ceremony, Eli admitted. Dramatic music, betrayal, maybe a surprise long-lost twin that usually happens during weddings, not affirmations. Good to know. I'll prepare a backup tux. They passed through a corridor lined with planetary seals, each representing a world bound by treaty, by history, by hope. Some glowed brightly, others flickered, a few remained dark. The sword has been pulled, Lysrai said, touching one of the unlit seals, but not all will welcome it. I figured as much. They'll see you as an accident, as chaos wearing shoes. I am very proud of my shoes. She turned to him, serious now. This is only the beginning. The sword opens doors, but some of those doors lead to rooms best left locked. Do they at least have decent lighting? Number, and usually ghosts. They turned another corner and stepped into a chamber where a banquet had been prepared. It was not extravagant, more like a practical feast, dishes from different planets, a table shaped like a galaxy, spiral servers that floated rather than walked. A few alien dignitaries were already nibbling on translucent cubes and what looked like edible wind. Lysrai paused. One last thing, let me guess, dance ritual involving awkward pelvic movements. Number 8 message came in from Earth. Eli froze. What she handed him, a small disc. When he activated it, a flickering image formed, grainy, patched from a distant relay. General Breck's face grumpy, weathered, surprised. Vance, what the hell are you doing out there? Eli grinned, saving the universe slowly with jokes. The message continued, commands received. The reports you're apparently married, possibly a religious icon, and definitely not coming back in time for inventory week. Well done. Eli looked at Lysai, so ready to meet my people. She considered it. Only if I get to make first contact with your coffee supply. He held out his arm. Princess, I think that can be arranged. They landed on Earth with the elegance of a diplomatic swan dive, meaning the landing gear extended. Halfway through atmospheric descent, a warning alarm insisted on quoting ancient poetry in binary, and the onboard AI started singing what might have been an operatic lament about re-entry turbulence. Still, the ship touched down on the flat plain outside a decommissioned observatory in the Nevada desert with only minor complaints, and one suspicious scorch mark that would later be blamed on a rogue squirrel with cybernetic implants. Eli stepped out, first blinking at the brutal familiarity of real sunlight and dry wind, and the scent of dust that hadn't filtered through an alien atmospheric recycler. His boots sank slightly into the sand, and for a moment he just stood there, trying to reconcile the surreal knowledge that the last time he'd been on Earth he'd had exactly 0 swords and absolutely no alien princess fiancées. Lysrai followed, her long ears twitching at the sound of insects in distant turbine hums. She was dressed not in her royal regalia, but something far less intimidating, simple dark robes adapted for Earth's climate, though her stride still had the effortless confidence of someone who could command a moon with a raised eyebrow. This is your planet, she asked. Technically, though I don't think the squirrels have forgiven us for spacefaring. A small ground transport kicked up dust as it approached, driven by a man wearing sunglasses the size of small satellites and a jacket that probably had its own postal code. The vehicle came to a halt with a hiss, and the man stepped out, squinting like the sun owed him money. Vance, he said. General Breed, Eli replied. They stared at each other for a beat, then the general grunted and held out a hand. Still have all your limbs, give or take one metaphysical understanding of destiny close enough. He turned his gaze to Larai. His eyebrows went up exactly 1 millimeter, and this would be the alien Princess Lizarai said smoothly, extending her hand. Lizarai of the House of Nine. Stream's wielder of the Truth Bond, guardian of the T-Fold sigil and recent. Convert to the merits of peanut butter. Breck blinked. Ma'am, they boarded the transport, which rattled with patriotic determination as it carried them to the subterranean base recently repurposed. For diplomatic reception, it had all the charm of a concrete bunker decorated by someone whose idea of interior design involved large screens, uncomfortable chairs, and motivational posters left over from the 201,190s. One read, success is mandatory. So is coffee. Eli led Lysarai through the gauntlet of security checks, retina scans, and a particularly nosy scanner that beeped at his left elbow for reasons no one could explain. Eventually, they reached the debriefing room, a large oval chamber with holographic displays already flickering to life. We've received updates from your star system. Breck began once everyone was seated. Alliance records ceremonial transmissions, grainy footage of a sword glowing like a rave on purpose. You've caused quite the stir. Wasn't really trying to, Eli said, mostly just pulled the thing because it looked stuck, and nobody else had figured out how. You pulled a millennia-old symbol of galactic unity from a crystalline core, and accidentally became royalty. I do have a talent for stumbling into allegories. Lister, I leaned forward. Earth's involvement was not foreseen, but the blade recognized something in him, something essential. This is no longer a matter of one world's legacy, it concerns all of us. A hologram lit up showing star charts. Points blinked in red. These systems, Bree said, have gone quiet, unresponsive to comms patrols sent in. Have failed to report back. We're not officially calling it a threat yet, because threats require paperwork. Eli muttered. Breck continued. One patterns emerged. Each of the system's houses a fragment of a network, something ancient, possibly older than the Accord itself. Our guess is that whoever or whatever is behind the disappearances is targeting these relic sites. Licarai stood and walked to the hologram, tracing a glowing path with her finger. These are sites tied to the Blad's legacy guardianship nodes. If someone is disrupting them, they're trying to unbind the Accord. Eli finished. Break. The Alliances cut the story at its spine. Breck nodded. We need a team. Your sword and answers. Eli crossed his arms. So Earth's officially involved now. You pulled the sword. You married the princess. You're not getting out of this with a vacation request. Later, they stood on the launch pad, staring at the ship being retrofitted for the mission. It now bore both the insignia of the Accord and the colonial Earth fleet, a visual marriage between stars and stripes and slightly pretentious cosmic spirals. You sure about this? Eli asked Lysarai as technicians hustled by. No, she said. But if we wait for certainty, the enemy will write the next chapter without us. He glanced up at the stars. Well, he muttered, at least the food will be terrible again. The ship's AI chimed in over the intercom. Correction, menu has been updated. There is now a 42% chance of encountering mystery stew. C. Ali said, a true return to form. They boarded the vessel not as strangers anymore, not as tourists in each other's myths, but as something stranger, partners in a story that hadn't been written yet. The stars waited, blinking patiently as the ship roared to life. The battle wasn't like the stories. There were no heroic speeches shouted across the vacuum of space, no last-minute cavalry screaming out of hyperspace, no soaring music composed by someone with a degree in inspirational chord progressions. There was only silence, cold, mathematical silence, as ancient machines unfolded themselves from hidden vaults across the edges of the collapsing star system. The Accord fleet moved like a patchwork organism, ships of all shapes, colors, and philosophies banded together by the sheer absurdity of their situation. Earth's cruisers bore the scars of pragmatic retrofits. Larized people brought elegant vessels that hummed with harmonic shielding, and somewhere in the middle of all this chaos was Eli, strapped into a cockpit that had no business trusting him with this many buttons. He flicked a few switches and accidentally turned on the ship's galley oven. Okay, that's not missiles, but someone's going to enjoy a surprise casserole. Focus, Larai's voice chimed through the comms. Calm as ever. You have the blade. I also have exactly 4 hours of formal training in spatial dogfighting, and half of that was watching a documentary narrated by a talking squid. The sword pulsed at his side, glowing in synchrony with the ship systems it had. Fused literally with the command core, rewriting protocols like an overachieving student fed up with mediocrity. When Eli touched the hilt, his thoughts moved faster, data streamed in. Colors, the stars had rhythm, even fear felt more symmetrical, the enemy didn't. Arrive all at once, they seeped through folds in reality, metallic constructs with the malicious patience of something that had waited millennia just to be inconvenient. At their core was the null node, a structure built to cancel bonds, erase agreements, and collapse unity into pure weaponized apathy. Target the node. Came Breck's voice. He was orbiting just above them in command. It's projecting a dissonance field. If we don't break it, even our alliances will start to unravel. Eli understood already. Systems were misfiring, ships peeled away from formation, old grudges whispered in minds. Like static, the blade flared, struggling to hold it all together. Can we slice the metaphor? Eli asked. You mean the node? Larry replied, no, I mean reality itself, but yes, also the node. They accelerated. Fighters zipped past one of Earth's drones, launched a barrage of missiles shaped like flying harmonas because apparently someone in R&D had a sense of humor. Eli's ship dove through the debris field of an ancient satellite, narrowly avoiding what looked like a floating billboard for interstellar hair implants. Closing, and he said, watching the node grow larger in the viewport, you ready? I was born ready. That's a suspiciously cliché thing to say in a moment like this. It's traditional. They struck at once Lycerai's ship, flanking from the right, Eli's from the left. The sword surged, and for one brilliant second, it was everywhere, a line of light arcing through space, echoing across every screen, every control panel, every nervous heart. The node cracked, not exploded. Cracked like a bell, discovering it had been lying about harmony this whole time, and just like that the noise stopped. Not silence, real quiet, a settling. The enemy ships faltered, losing coherence. They didn't retreat, they simply disintegrated, like stories being unwritten one by one. Systems came back online, comms cleared the fleet, reformed. Breck's voice, even gruffer, now came through. Well, you two just rewrote an ancient treaty with a laser sword. Nice work. Eli slumped back in his seat, arms shaking. Do I get a medal or maybe just a chair that rescines properly? You'll get both, and probably a press conference. Oh no, not that. Later. Back on Lycerai's home world, beneath the luminous branches of the world tree that had once whispered prophecy and now mostly played ambient music for festivals, they stood side by side. The blade rested in a new shrine, not embedded in crystal this time, but placed on a pedestal made of eed roots in nanocarbon filaments. It glowed gently at peace. Delegates from a dozen worlds gathered nearby. The accord had not only survived, it had changed. Earth was now a part of it, not reluctantly, not awkwardly, but with full recognition that their stubborn, half-trained soldier had saved everyone's collective narrative. So, Eli said, holding a glass of something mildly effervescent, we've averted galactic collapse, rewired a mystical sword, and made peace between 16 species. How do you feel? Tired? Lysai admitted, hopeful and mildly concerned about the creature that's been following you around since the banquet. Eli turned to see a small six-legged being wearing what looked like one of his socks as a cape. That's probably normal, he said. No, it is absolutely not. Still, he added, looking out at the horizon where sky met the stars, we did it. We did. They stood quietly for a moment, not because they had run out of things to say, but because they'd earned the silence, the kind of quiet that followed endings and the promise of beginnings, the kind that didn't demand resolution, because the story had already found it. You think the sword is done? Ali asked. Larry looked at it. Swords don't rest, but sometimes they let others carry the story forward. He smiled. Then maybe next time someone else pulls it out of something weird like a cake, exactly, a prophetic cake. She laughed, and this time it was not the laugh of a royal or a soldier or a symbol of a galactic legacy. It was just her. Lycerai. Eli didn't need a sword to know that was